Game of Thrones, Season 8, Episode 3, TV review. Right, so where have I been the last week, huh? I was traveling, so I just got back, so I'm reviewing this a week late. I realize at this point nobody cares because Episode 4 is just about to come out in a few hours. So I'm probably largely just talking to myself on this video, but having committed to a project, I'm going to see it all the way through, and if I'm just talking to myself, then so be it. Yeah, so I was traveling. I didn't see this when it was broadcast, or not. Would you say broadcast with cable TV? I didn't see this when it was on. I had to resort to tracking down a copy on the internet. Although, for whatever it's worth, if anyone's interested, I do have HBO at my apartment as part of the cable package that came with the apartment. So at least for this season, I have been watching it legitimately. If you go back through my history, I can't say I was watching it legitimately for all 8 seasons, but this season, I've been largely watching it legitimately, except for this episode where I missed it because I was traveling. I had to track it down on the internet. Yeah. So, this was the big battle scene. The big battle episode. And actually, even before this episode came out, I remember seeing an article on the internet. It was on the Gizmodo I09 website. I don't know if anyone else saw it, which said something to the effect of like, get ready to not understand what's happening in the next episode of Game of Thrones. They were already predicting that because there was going to be this big battle at night, it was going to be very hard to understand what was going on. Now that I've seen the episode, I've got to say, it was okay for the most part. I could largely understand what was going on. It definitely could have been a little bit worse. But yeah, I'm a little bit confused about some of these characters. Like there are some characters I think I saw die, but I'm not entirely sure. Now, this may have been aggravated by the fact that I had an internet copy. I'm not sure if this came through a little bit cleaner and crisper on the broadcast. You don't say broadcast with cable TV, do you? On the version that was shown on HBO. I don't know. The version I tracked down on the internet looked alright for the most part, but it was a little bit pixely in parts. Yeah, probably could have been better. So that may have affected it. But yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to spoil everything because I'm figuring at this point, seeing as I'm a week late, everybody has seen this episode who plans on seeing it. Yeah. So after kind of 2 episodes of not much happening, we got a lot going on in this episode. It was a huge fight. Now, the problem with having like a big fight for 90 minutes or 80 minutes, however long this episode was, I actually wasn't keeping track. How long was this episode? This was one of the 80-minute episodes? 60-minute episodes? Anyways, the problem with having a big battle for the whole time is, I guess, what you would call the Hobbit Battle of 5 Armies problem. Which is that it sounds really cool to have this big battle that goes on forever. You're like, yeah, I'd love to see a big battle that goes on forever. But actually, there's a reason that most movies just have like a battle being the 20-minute climactic scene at the end, is because actually it turns out when you watch a battle go on and on and on, it does get a little bit boring after a while. Or at least it has a potential to. And this movie... This episode bordered on it, but just when I thought I was getting bored with it, something new and interesting would happen to kind of bring me back in. So they changed up the pace of it a couple times, right? You had that big battle, and then you switch to like that kind of claustrophobic, you know, hiding from zombies in the library. So they were changing up the pace of it, but there was also kind of just throughout, the intensity kept building and building and building. And like the screws kept tightening and tightening and tightening. So you're like, oh geez, oh, it's like, how are they ever going to get out of this one, right? And then of course, how they got out of it was kind of that cheat, that if you kill the main zombie, all the other zombies die. Which I kind of, to be fair, I think this was set up in previous seasons. I don't remember clearly, but I think this had been established previously. I had forgotten about this, so I was like, oh boy, there's no, how are they possibly going to resolve this? And then, all right, just kill the main zombie and then everybody else dies. But up until that final moment, it was like, oh man, it's just getting more and more and more intense. And it, you know, it worked. I think if you wanted to nitpick this battle, you could have been, in the sense of like, these ice zombies were a bit inconsistent. At sometimes they were kind of unstoppable machines. At other times they were just kind of fumbling zombies that the main characters could cut down very easily. I think that was a problem left over from the previous season. The battles, I wasn't doing YouTube reviews on the previous season, but that's something that did occur to me when I watched season 7 2 years ago. The fighting scenes with the zombies, the threat of the zombies seemed kind of inconsistent. I think you could make that same criticism for this battle. But that's a nitpick. I guess the main point is the intensity of it and the momentum of it really kind of had me enthralled. And the CGI was also very good. For the most part, again, there were some parts where I was a bit confused about what was going on. Like some of those dragon battles when they were in the snowstorm. I was like, all right, which dragon is where now? That may have been somewhat intentional on the part of the creators, is to make this sense of confusion. That also could have been the internet copy I watched. On the other hand, you know, those scenes where the dragons were fighting in the clouds with the moon in the background, kind of above the clouds, I guess. The dragons were fighting above the clouds and there was that big moon in the background. That was just beautiful. I mean, sure, it was largely CGI, but like, you know, it was one of those moments where you forgot temporarily it was CGI. Like it kind of looked like those dragons were real. And I remember thinking as I watched that, as somebody who's kind of been a geek my whole life and kind of into, you know, fantasy and stuff like that, thought, wow, I mean, I know people say this a lot, you know, like this is the golden age for geeks, or, you know, geek culture has taken over or something like that. But it's one of those moments where you thought, wow, it truly is a glorious time to be a geek. This, where you have like this big budget for TV, big budget TV series about these dragons fighting, and it comes off and it looks cool. It's changing topics. I had spent some time lamenting in my previous review, my review of episode 2, that the ice zombies had kind of overshadowed all the human conflict that had been built up in the previous 7 seasons. You know, again, as I mentioned the last time, this was something that was always on the cards, kind of. I mean, right from episode 1, that the threat of the ice zombies was going to kind of make all these quarrels the humans had against each other kind of moot. But on the other hand, it is these quarrels that the humans were having with each other that, was what we were watching this show for the first 6 seasons, largely. So it did seem like a bit of a cheat to completely reverse directions. I had some of that same lament at the beginning of this episode, where you had all these characters who had spent all these different times, in different factions and different groups, all lined up in battle formation together. And on the one hand, you're like, wow, it is so cool to see all these characters finally united now in one army. But on the other hand, you're thinking, what a shame. Because what made these characters so interesting is because they each had separate motivations and separate agendas. And that's why you were watching the show. And to see that all kind of wiped out and now they're just all in the same army seemed like a waste. But then, just when I'm set up to complain about this, the ice zombie threat was taken out at the end of this episode, right? Ice zombie threat plotline is no more now, presumably. I mean, I guess, we'll see what happens next episode, but that looks like what's going on now. And so now they're going to go back to the human conflict. So I was complaining about this too soon, maybe, or I guess we'll see where it goes from here. But yeah, maybe we're back into the human conflict. Yeah, some characters died in this episode. Now, again, I'm repeating myself from previous reviews, but I think another thing I said in a previous review was, now that we're 8 seasons in, it's hard to kind of kill off a character casually like they did in the first few seasons. Because after we spent all this time following these characters, we want to know why we were following these characters. On the other hand, we know this is Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones has to Game of Thrones. So they've got to kill off a certain amount of characters per episode. It's just what they do. So I guess the question is, did it make sense? That I don't remember the names of anybody. Theon, I guess, yeah, his character arc seemed complete. He got called a good man. That was all he ever wanted. I guess that's why we were following him. The guy whose name I don't remember, but the guy who had been raised up from the dead like 7 times or whatever by the Lord of the Light. I guess that made sense. I mean, when he first died and that woman said, the Lord of the Light has kept him alive all this time for a purpose. Now that purpose has been fulfilled. I was like, well, what purpose? He just, he saved that girl from the zombies, but the whole episode was other people saving other people from zombies. But then, of course, we find out at the end of the episode that she's the one who takes out the final zombie king and completely defeats all the zombie armies. So then, yeah, I guess it does make sense that that was his purpose and that was his story arc. Who else died in this episode? Jorah, right? The older guy who always liked Khaleesi. I guess that was a character arc. He died protecting her. The girl, what was the name of the girl? Lady Mormont or something like that? Yeah. I was a bit surprised they killed off the child, although I guess I shouldn't be at this point, because they've done this before. But, I mean, it's kind of a unique character, isn't it? I mean, it's not really a comedy TV series, but it is kind of like a funny, odd character to have this little girl who's acting like a grown woman. So I was surprised they were going to kind of turn that into a tragic sacrifice. But that's what this show does. Huh? It's going to take you off guard with things you weren't expecting. What other deaths were I not expecting? I've got a feeling there was maybe like a couple more, but yeah, sorry, I just saw the episode now and my brain's a bit frazzled. And it's late at night my time. So, yeah, I might not have anything else intelligent to say on this. Other than it was an intense episode. And, yeah, you know, say what you want. Those Game of Thrones people, you know, the guys who are making this show, yeah, they know how to put on a show, don't they? Yeah, well, boy, what an episode. Yeah, okay, I'll just finish it here.